Hello. Sorry, I was just taking a nap the way I always do. Do you not have one of those? Get out of here, nerd blanket. Did you know that a lot of the buttons you press every day in your day-to-day life do nothing, and they're only to give you an illusion of control? That's right. In the United States, at least, in 1990, we passed the Americans with Disabilities Act, and part of that act was to ensure that everybody, no matter their ability, could get on an elevator with enough time. And to make sure that happened, elevator engineers and manufacturers made sure that the doors closed after a certain amount of time, no matter what, which means that after 1990, any more modern elevators, the closed door button does not do anything. But they kept the buttons on the doors to give people an illusion of control. You can call these placebo buttons, and they're in more places than you think. For example, in the crosswalks in New York City, all of the walk buttons are completely automated, and pressing them does nothing, or nearly all of them. So when you press a closed door button in any modern elevator, it's just for your own satisfaction, your own mental need to have some kind of control over the situation. The open door button works, but the closed door does nothing. But I bet you do it anyway. And that's the whole point of why they're still there. I mean, I'll admit it, I've tried to close the door before people could get on. Hello and welcome to another edition of Footnotes, the companion show to Because Science, where I take all of your comments, questions, and corrections and I press buttons on the internet until they become a video such as this one. And then I tell you what's coming up next on this channel. Hint, it has to do with a certain billionaire's space car. You'll never guess what it is and who it is and what it's about. But getting right into it, on the last episode of Because Science, I wanted to show you how the most complicated board game on the planet that we know of can be turned into a literal computer. More specifically, we are looking into the game of Magic: The Gathering, seeing how we can implement a Turing machine inside of an actual board state, according to a research paper by Dr. Alex Churchill and his colleagues that we were outlining. Some of you said that this is the nerdiest thing we've ever done. It was computer science, Magic: The Gathering, and a whole lot of stuff that you said you didn't understand, but we'll get to that. I know the video was super complicated and probably partially confusing, but I wanted to take a chance here and show you an experiment with a nerdy hobby of mine that was literally, I think, a world first. So what did you have to say? Oh, I passed priority. No response. What were your responses? Oh, scoop. Our first comment comes from many of you, and it seems like the comments for this video were 50-50 split between, "Hey Kyle, I had no idea what you're talking about," and "Hey Kyle, this was awesome." That's totally my fault. I know that this is a complicated video, and I wanted to get into it because I'm such a big Magic: The Gathering nerd and because computer science is so interesting. So it is my fault if computer science isn't really your thing and I didn't explain it fully, and I didn't explain how to play Magic: The Gathering at all. So if you felt lost, you're not alone. That's my fault. I want to give you just the basic gist of what we're getting at, though. In a game of Magic: The Gathering, there are certain phases. So you draw a card, you play the spells that you want to play, you move to a combat phase if you want to attack someone else and lower their life total down to 0, and then you win, and then you pass the turn, basically. There are a number of phases, and what this Turing machine wants to do is control the phases completely, remove human input from them, and then implement a quote-unquote program using rules that are built into Magic: The Gathering itself. So what Alex Churchill did, and what we were trying to do with the actual game, was to find certain rules, certain text on the cards that would have the same effect that a Turing machine would want. So reading and writing symbols on a tape, that's something that rules text can do on Magic: The Gathering cards if we're destroying creatures or putting +1/+1 counters on other creatures, moving things to the left and to the right. We are just using the mechanics of Magic: The Gathering to implement a Turing machine. Even if you don't know how to play, I think you can appreciate that using a game's rules to simulate a computer is something we really haven't seen before, and it's EJ Wren says, "I don't know if that's the weirdest game of Magic I've ever seen. Vintage Workshop, which is a deck, can get pretty crazy." I disagree. You know why? Because you did not see the 2.5 hours of footage that we had to cut down into just 22 minutes, which was very difficult. It took me an hour and a half just to set up the board, just to literally explain what I was doing. So I think we did a pretty good job cutting all that down to just a few minutes. It is certainly the craziest game I've ever seen. I've never been in a game where it took 2.5 hours to get through the first turn. Our next comment comes from Blue Firefox, who says, Kyle creates a complex computer board. Me, judge! So there's an interesting point here, which is this deck right here. This deck right here is legacy legal. You would be able to bring this to Legacy, which is a format, a Legacy tournament, and you would be able to play it. But there's a grander point, which the researchers actually get to, which is if you play it, it might take you so long to set up the things that we did in the episode that the judge might call you out for slow play or end the game. Like, oh, can you demonstrate that you're going to win or not? Otherwise, the game has to end. That's a good, valid, and practical point. And I will say that Dr. Alex Churchill, who I worked with on this video, who helped write that paper, who made this Turing machine, responded in the comments. And Dr. Churchill says, as it happens, I've asked a few judges about what would happen with this deck. It's perfectly legal to set up, but you might be required to skip past the actual computation step. You might need to pre-warn judges in advance, like, I'm probably just going to concede all my matches, but I might just manage to set up this insanely complicated board state. Is it okay if I play it out for a few minutes? So it's not really about the winning. It's more about being able to demonstrate it. But in theory, you could do this in an actual tournament, and then your opponent would have a very weird story to tell. Yeah, this guy paid money, and then I sat down, and he did basically nothing. It was cool, though. Our next comment comes from Michael D. Madia, who says, oh, so do you win? Well, let me tell you about the halting problem. Yes, actually, the halting problem is something we didn't really get to in the episode. So the halting problem is a problem in computer science that says for any Turing machine, for anything that's Turing complete that can simulate a Turing machine and therefore construct a Turing machine for any arbitrary calculation, if there is no program that can tell whether or not this program will run forever in a loop or halt, stop, then it is demonstrating the halting problem is Turing complete, it's a universal Turing machine, that kind of thing. So by that principle, this deck is Turing complete, which means it demonstrates the halting problem, which means it's as mathematically complex as a game like this can be. And it also means that no computer, no algorithm, no program, no judge on the planet, no matter how experienced, not even me, can tell you whether or not a deck like this will run forever or if it will halt, which will result in me casting coalition victory and I win. So this is so complicated that it demonstrates a well-known problem in computer science that is usually only reserved for, like, computers. And that in itself is amazing. But the nerdiest comment at the time I'm filming this episode, I'm giving to William Bosley, who says, hey Kyle, love the show. And just want to say that you are a super nerd. Yeah, oh, not yet. Take it back. William says, it's great to finally hear someone else straight up agree with me that Magic is more complicated than chess and Go. You'd think that just explaining that in chess and Go there's a limited number of spaces and pieces, while in Magic your life total and your board space are technically infinite. You think this would convince people. I watched my friend get to 7 Googleplex life with a creature whose power and toughness was equal to the life total against my brother's Rebel deck. And then the Rebel deck won with 3 life against that deck about 20 turns later. It was kind of crazy. Reminds me of the plot to Star Wars and the destruction of the Death Star. I love Magic. I have over 6,000 cards. I only have 2,000-ish unique cards, so about 1/10 of the complete set. Anyways, keep up the great videos. Hey, you know what? Island. Pass. William, I do think this is important to point out. Magic, because of how many cards, how many unique cards, how many interactions it has, Magic is mathematically more complicated than those games that we hold up to be the most complicated. A super nerd will get to this later on, but it's almost impossible mathematically to play Magic perfectly. So to point that out in the context of chess and Go, I think is important. Let's hold up Magic as the most complicated thing. Everyone knows it, and everyone should at least try it. That is, until they get, you know, slammed by a combo player like me. So for that comment, William, you are indeed a super nerd. Wait, gotta, cut? No, okay, going down to 6, Yep, I cast super nerd. Worth it. But of course, I'm not always right. This game of Magic took me 2.5 hours to set up with very experienced Magic players, and I've been playing for over 20 years, and I still barely understand this thing. So what did I get wrong last week? Our first correction comes from Super Nerd Ninja Bear Films, who says technically Magic is not a board game, it's a tabletop card game. No board involved. You could play Magic on a board. Checkmate. It's what we call a big brain play. Island, pass. You sure you want to do that? Force of will! Our next correction comes from Unveiled Denial. You all right? And a number of you who says, excuse me, Yu-Gi-Oh's possession is with an ancient Egyptian pharaoh, not a demon, shaking my head. I said Yu-Gi-Oh is possessed by a demon, but instead he's possessed by an ancient Egyptian pharaoh. Yeah, they've activated my trap card.
Attack, Dark Magician. Use your whatever attack is for 500 or whatever it is. They'll never see it coming.
Oh, sorry, I was just ordering another solid gold pyramid necklace and dyeing my hair red and black and yellow and using too much hair gel. Yu-Gi-Oh uses too much hair gel. Our next correction comes from Mitskil Kiev, who says, hey Kyle, you drew your entire library during that game, so you lost the game. Well, let me clarify something about Magic the Gathering. So I did indeed do something ridiculous. I drew, instead of one card a turn, I drew my entire library into my hand in a single turn. But you only lose the game in Magic the Gathering if you were to draw a card, but your library has 0 cards in it. Because I drew all the cards in my library at once and didn't draw any further, and I replaced cards with things like Right to Lantern, when I had to draw a card, I did technically not lose the game at any point. Otherwise, the whole video is invalidated, but it's not. Our next correction comes from Shiroi Watashi no Mori, who says, I just can't stop thinking about how expensive that deck must be. Well, actually, it's not so bad. All these cards, and you can see this right now. There. You can see Table 3 from the paper, Magic the Gathering is Turn Complete by Alex Churchill and his colleagues. You can see the table of the 60-card Legacy deck, and you can purchase all these cards and do everything that I just did. And although Magic the Gathering doesn't acknowledge the secondary market, if you put these prices into a card store online or something like that, this deck is about $1,500. Now, that is a lot, but in Magic the Gathering terms, it's really not that much. But the nerdiest correction at the time I'm filming this episode, I'm giving to Matt Levy, who says, hey Kyle, love the show, been watching for years. Thank you. Thank you for the support. It means a lot. And the comment's a little long, but it's really good. I understand your desire to show a Turing machine implemented using Magic, but there's an amazing implication that Churchill et al. Discuss in the paper. The results of a Magic game are undecidable in a computational sense. This means that it is impossible to write a computer program that can play an optimal game of Magic. The authors think that it might even be harder than the halting problem to determine an optimal strategy. That's an incredible thing for a game to have. Even though you are using a finite deck, there is no possible computer program that can always determine the best next play. Chess isn't like that. You can project out possible board states and evaluate which is better. Solving chess requires computational resources we will probably never have, but it can be done in theory. You cannot do this for Magic. It's not a matter of having faster computers or quantum computers or even thousands of years. It cannot be done. A game that millions of people play is so hard that no computer can solve it perfectly ever. Try to wrap your brain around that and rejoice, because even if the AIs take over, they still won't be able to dominate us in Magic the Gathering tournaments. I have nothing to add. That's a fantastic comment, Matt Levy, and you are indeed for that a super nerd. Pay 1 extra for Ristic Study. But enough about a card game that many of you have never played, and back to some sciencey, perhaps super villainy stuff, because the next episode of Because Science is how to steal Elon Musk's space car. That's right, in this week's episode of Because Science, for totally not supervillainy reasons, we are going to go through the orbital mechanics and maneuvers necessary to steal Elon Musk's Tesla Midnight Cherry Roadster. How long would it take? How much thrust would it take? What would the actual trajectory through space and time look like? We have a plan, but I don't condone it, and I'm not gonna do it. But also, we're gonna tell you how to do it. Don't tell Elon. But before we steal a very rich man's very expensive car from space, nice! Go watch the latest episode of Because Science if you haven't yet, all about a Magic the Gathering Turing machine, and leave me all of your comments, questions, corrections, and things where you say, hey Kyle, I couldn't follow this video at all, at youtube.com/BecauseScience. I tried my best. Facebook.com/BecauseScience and at BecauseScience on Instagram and Twitter. And don't forget, I think we can learn something from elevators and placebo buttons, because when someone pushes your buttons, don't let it affect you at all. That's how elevators be do.